Thank you guys, really happy to be here.
So thank you very much, Andrew, for coming to speak this morning. And we're switching up the format a little bit, and we're going to do a fireside chat. And we normally begin with asking the speaker to tell us a little bit about yourself. And in your case, you've got a pretty interesting story. So please share with us your background.
Sure. So both of my parents are dentists, and clearly I'm Asian. So like any good Asian boy, they didn't give me many selections on what I could choose to be in my life. So they told me I had to be a doctor of some sort. And since they were dentists, I chose to become a dentist myself. And I come from a family of dentists, right? So my uncle's also a dentist. I have cousins that are oral surgeons, dentists. My sister is a pediatric dentist. My brother-in-law is an orthodontist. And I'm a periodontist. So I had a deal with my parents that, look, I'll go ahead and do the route that you want me to do, but my true passion has always been in investing and entrepreneurship. And my deal with them always was, if I do really well in one of my companies or investing, you're going to allow me to basically follow my true path, right? Which is what I wanted to do. So basically what happened was I started a few tech companies. And during my journey, of course, as a startup, you need investment capital. So during my journey of my companies, I was trying to raise money, and I went to a family office meeting. And at this family office meeting, they had someone from Coinbase there. They had an executive from Coinbase speaking. And up until this moment, this was about 2017, I personally kept thinking that crypto and blockchain was just fake internet money. And I didn't want anything to do with it because I really thought it was just a scam. But when I saw these very wealthy people starting to learn about blockchain, I thought to myself, maybe that's my clue that I need to figure out what is going on. So after that, I basically came home and I started reading about blockchain for an entire week straight. I was reading about how Bitcoin works. It took me probably 50 times reading the same article just to figure out the basics of how it works. But once I figured out how it worked, a light bulb went off in my head where I said, oh my goodness, this is huge. And I really wish more people understood it, because I do believe this will be the future of finance and the basis of how we transfer value in the future.
Actually, that was a good segue to my next question. Is your topic is blockchain technology and how it represents the future of financial systems and some of the new opportunities. Can you tell us why you feel that way?
Sure. So if we're talking about new technologies, the new technologies will be like a baseline that will allow new technologies to develop upon it. If you look at Apple, once they released the iPhone and the App Store allowed new applications to be built upon it, new businesses to be built upon it, stuff like Uber, right? And Uber obviously has transformed the way we live our lives, and they have a market cap of well into the tens of billions of dollars. When we think about blockchain, one of the examples I like to use is NFTs. So aside from NFTs, with the Bored Ape and the silly cartoons, NFTs are going to have massive impact on our lives. One of our audience members, you said you were working with Disney. So I often use Disney as an example, especially when we talk about intellectual property rights. So Disney one day will probably come out with a limited edition release of like 10,000 Star Wars movies, okay? And because there are way more than 10,000 Star Wars fans in the world, you can imagine that if these NFTs are somehow linked to the blockchain, and these are the only ones that will ever be created, very soon, within a few probably days, you're going to have these NFTs that are the official Star Wars movies selling for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the secondary market. So why would Disney want to do this? Disney would want to do this because in the NFT, it will have a smart contract built into it where 10 to 20% of the resale value automatically will go back to Disney every single time it is sold, right? So NFTs will radically transform how we even think about intellectual property. And this will apply, of course, not just to Disney, but anything that's like music, books, right? And even art. So that's just a small glimpse of what blockchain will do and what NFTs will become, besides just the Bored Ape Yacht Club.
It's interesting. My background is in finance, and so I look at asset classes, and traditionally asset classes are stocks, bonds, cash, commodities, real estate. Those are your traditional asset classes. Now, what I'm seeing more and more often is a new asset class called digital assets. And you just talked about NFTs. And we also have central banks now talking about digital currency. And of course, cryptocurrency has been around for several years now, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, etc. Can you talk a little bit about central banks and digital currency, why they are thinking of going in that direction, and how that would relate to other types of digital currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple?
All right. So currently, when you open up your application and you check out your bank account, you're seeing sovereign fiat currency represented digitally through your device. All right. But what happens is a CBDC, or a central bank digital currency, is simply the same fiat currency that you're currently seeing, except now the technology is built upon blockchain. So if we look at the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of all central banks, 90% of all central banks on earth are either developing, researching, or have already created a central bank digital currency. And soon it will be 100%. So why do central banks want to create a central bank digital currency? Well, let's think about some of the abilities of blockchain that they're interested in. The first one would be settlement times. If we use, for example, let's say Bitcoin. Bitcoin is able to settle transactions in about 10 minutes. That's very slow in the blockchain world, but when you think about traditional finance, that is extremely fast. Let's say right now I wrote you a check and you went to deposit it in the bank. It would generally take at least 2 to 3 days for that deposit to hit your bank account, right? So that's one example of why central banks are going towards central bank digital currencies. Another example would be smart contracts or smart money, programmable money, something that you would think about with Ethereum. So an example that I use is, let's talk about 2 years ago. Of course, we just came out of COVID, and the government was trying to give a lot of PPP loans to everybody. In order for the government to do so, they were trying to rush out the money extremely quickly, and everyone had to do a lot of applications to get the money, and it oftentimes took about 6 to 8 weeks until you got the money. But once we have central bank digital currencies, everyone will be able to have a digital wallet, right? And the government can literally send the money to you much quicker because it could potentially bypass the existing banks. But even if it did have to go through the banks, it would go much quicker. But they can also program the money to be specific and used for specific purposes. So let's talk about stimulating, like let's say they just want to make sure that you have food on the table. So they can make it so everyone will get $1,000 in food credits, but that money can then only be used at a supermarket or at a restaurant, right? So then that would also help fight the fraud and the corruption that we've been seeing with the PPP loans, because even the government estimates about 20% of that is fraudulent and is going to buy, stuff like Lamborghinis, right? Another thing that the central bank, of course, is very interested in is unemployment and inflation. And with them managing the central bank digital currencies, they will be able to manage money supplies and interest rates instantaneously. You don't have to wait for you to do it and then wait for it to go down the chain through the banks. So for all these purposes, every central bank on earth is going down this route. And there's also a technological competition between countries, because the currencies that are able to transact faster and be more efficient will be the ones more likely used, thereby increasing their demand.
So basically what you're saying is, from a cost standpoint, from an efficiency standpoint, from a time standpoint, it will be much more efficient. So it's kind of like, I'm old school, going from an analog system to a digital system where you can have better control of the monetary of money, basically. And that would be one of the reasons, or maybe the main reasons, why central banks wants to go in that direction, correct?
Yes, absolutely, that's correct.
So let me ask you a question about that, because one of the benefits that has been said about digital currency, and especially with regards to cryptocurrency, is the fact that it's decentralized, meaning it's not under the control of a government agency. And yet, if you're talking about a central bank, which is now going to become the guiding force of a digital currency, How will that impact the industry?
Right. So I think what you're referring to is a little bit of the idealism of like how Bitcoin came up and how Ethereum came up. The ideals of those blockchains were for you to decentralize everything and take power away from the central banks, right? To create a financial system outside of the current financial system. The central banks obviously are concerned about that because that would take power away from them. And blockchain as a technology can be used for either or, right? It depends on the people creating it or in charge of the technology. So the central bank digital currencies will certainly try to rein in privatized transactions. That's why you see stuff like Tornado Cash, which is basically a mixer for money. All of them get banned very quickly by the government. But something like Ethereum and Bitcoin, even though they're trying to create a financial system outside their current financial system, they are not banned. Why is that? The reason why is because all the on-ramps are being controlled by the exchanges like Coinbase, FTX, Binance. So all of them are currently regulated by the same banking standards where they have know your customer, anti-money laundering rules. So it is very easy for the government to trace and track any transaction on Bitcoin and Ethereum. So what we're really seeing in the future is that there aren't going to be two financial systems. There's not going to be one that's outside the government and one that's with the government. The crypto markets and the traditional finance markets are merging into one system. And eventually everything will be interoperable and you'll be transfer anything of value, even across blockchains from one to another seamlessly.
And so we're already seeing a lot in the news about the regulations that are being established in order to have a better environment, a fair environment for all parties involved. Where are we at with that? Because there's a lot of debate on it. Is it gonna, are we, a year out from that? Are we 2 years out from that? These types of policies takes time to be established and then to get passed. What is your outlook as far as that whole process is concerned?
Right. I think the United States has been relatively slow compared to the rest of the world in terms of regulating and providing clear guidance for cryptocurrency and blockchain. However, the United States is catching up. So if we look at March of this year, President Biden issued an executive order asking every branch of government to create their own reports to talk about how to regulate crypto and blockchain properly, right? And if we're looking, and so that's on that front. And there is currently like good regulation when it comes to like exchanges, but the uncertainty specifically is talking about whether cryptocurrencies are a commodity or security. That is where we don't really have very good guidance yet. But the good news for someone like me who's in the crypto space is there are 3 bills currently in Congress that will probably be voted on next year after the midterm elections, where they're all bipartisan, which is pretty rare nowadays. And all of them are giving regulatory clarity regulatory control to the CFTC, which is what we want as insiders in the crypto market. Because of course, if you're registered as a security, it takes a lot longer to be moved, and that eliminates one of the main purposes of blockchain technology.
So we've already seen the acceptance of the general public in cryptocurrency, i.e. in the number of investors and the amount that's been invested in Bitcoin and Ethereum and Ripple and all of the other. Talk about some of the, and then of course the governments, we just talked about some of the digital currency that they're working on. What about the industry? What about the financial industry? How is that coming along? Are there companies, large banks, investment firms that are also looking to jump onto that bandwagon?
Yeah, certainly all of the major tech companies are already currently involved and heavily invested in crypto, right? If we take a look at Google, they're heavily invested. Same with BlackRock, which is, certainly you can say it's almost the sovereign wealth fund of the United States. They're invested into Circle, which does stablecoins. And Wall Street, or the DTCC, which is the settlement company of Wall Street, is now trialing blockchain to settle all Wall Street and all stocks transactions. So inevitably, we're getting to the point where everything of value is going to be transferred and settled through blockchain. And that's why I'm so bullish on it.
So on the flip side of all of that, right now we're in the middle of what a lot of people describe as the crypto winter. And cryptocurrency like Luna, for example, has certainly given the industry a black eye, and there's a few others. Can you talk about what happened there? There's obviously too much hype, and at the beginning of any industry, and I was around during the dot-com crash, and prior to that, with any company with a dot-com behind its name, all of a sudden became valued, outrageously. I see the same thing happening with the cryptocurrency industry. But in a way, that's also good, isn't it? Because now you kind of weed out the bad players, and the survivors, like the Amazons of the world, now become stronger and become more realistic in terms of its business model, as opposed to the hype that you see at the beginning of any new technology.
Exactly. You actually alluded to a lot of that already. But the Terra Luna crash, which was a Ponzi scheme, they were basically promising 20% returns, and by basically just holding their stable coin, which is clearly a Ponzi scheme. But they had tons of huge companies heavily invested with them. They had Celsius, BlockFi, Voyager, Three Arrows Capital. All of these companies were worth in the billions, and in Three Arrows Capital up to $18 billion, right? So you had a bunch of these people that were industry insiders who thought they knew what they were doing, trying to make that 20%, and they had hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars invested in Terra Luna. So when Terra Luna was exposed as a Ponzi scheme, all of these companies unfortunately died with it. But the benefit of this is that all of the fake leveraged money is finally being wiped out. And like you just alluded to, it's now basically very similar to when we had our dot-com bust. So that's why we focus on investing in the companies that are currently still hiring and the ones that are surviving this crash. The ones that survive this crash are going to be the next trillion-dollar companies like we see with Apple, Google, Microsoft, but they're going to be in blockchain.
You might talk about this before in the past, and you use the still hiring criteria as a sign that the company is not going away. Can you talk a little bit about what other due diligence that you also look at when analyzing these companies, because you're in the process of setting up a fund that will be investing in blockchain infrastructure companies. And you mentioned earlier, it's a new industry, books are written about it, rules haven't been established yet, but it is what you see as the wave of the future.
Right. So certainly for due diligence, we look at what you just mentioned, and we also look at who is invested in these companies, what their use case is, and does it make sense, right? So the vast majority of crypto projects right now, easily 99% plus, are scams, rug pulls, they're just frauds, all right? But that 1% that is legit, that are solving true use cases for the world, they're going to be absolutely huge, right? So those are the companies that we're invested in, companies that are building out the infrastructure and the payment rails of the future. Those are the ones that we are very interested in, and also other issues like custody, because custody, we want to avoid all the hacks that's been happening in crypto. So the companies that are developing these solutions for that are also going to be pretty good.
Now, for those of you that are not aware, banks uses a system called SWIFT for interbank transactions and payment transfers and things like that. And with regards to the crypto industry, there's the Ripple XRP. Can you kind of compare and contrast how Ripple will make the banking industry, finance industry, a little bit more efficient compared to how SWIFT is currently operating? Because there's an old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I'm not so sure if you can say that it's not broke, because it's obviously not the most efficient way of transacting business.
Sure. So whenever we do a wire transfer, let's say we're doing a wire currently from the United States to somewhere in France. If there isn't a corresponding banking relationship between the bank that I'm using in the United States and the bank in France, then the money doesn't move directly from the United States to France. What happens is the money will literally move geographically as we get closer to France. It might first go to Britain, and then it'll go to France. So that's why Brad Carlinghouse, the CEO of Ripple, has always said that, if I wanted to give you, let's say, $10,000, it would be faster for me to literally get on a flight with a briefcase for $10,000 and bring it right to you. So that's the current existing system with Swift. But when you're using something like cryptocurrency, it doesn't have to be necessarily XRP, but literally you can move the money instantaneously with the message, because Swift is just a messaging platform. It doesn't settle any of the money. So now, if you're using like Ripple system with RippleNet, you can send the message that you want to send $10,000 to this bank account in France, but you can attach $10,000 worth of XRP with it. So the way it works is you can have an account with Coinbase or one of Ripple's other partners. You would buy $10,000 worth of XRP. XRP then moves from Coinbase to a crypto exchange in France, where it is then exchanged for $10,000 worth of French native currency, right, instantaneously. And that generally takes about 3 to 4 seconds in Ripple's case. But there are a lot of other tokens that can be used for this mechanism, not just XRP.
To wrap up this talk, as far as the blockchain infrastructure technology is concerned and the future financial system, can you give us what your vision is for the future? And maybe like a time frame of when you think some of this will take place?
Yes, all of this will be developing in, just like the internet, it'll probably take another 1 to 2 decades to fully develop, but we're going to see a lot of this being implemented very, very soon. Right. So what you just mentioned about using crypto in order to send payments, that standard was supposed to be, it's called the ISO 222 standard. That was supposed to be implemented this month, but it's actually delayed until early next year in March. Right. So you can imagine pretty soon we'll be able to move money like information, like data. And that's the goal and promise of blockchain technology.
And you mentioned earlier with the some of these regulations going before a bipartisan government group that hopefully sometime after the midterm elections. I know that Ripple XRP, for example, is being discussed currently at the SEC, that once some of these issues are resolved or there's some clarity, it's going to expedite and speed up the changes in the financial system.
Right. The Ripple SEC lawsuit is a bellwether for the entire industry. So that's why even in the past week, we've had 12 amicus briefs on behalf of Ripple being submitted to the court. Right. So the entire industry right now is realizing how big this case is. And luckily for us, it seems like Ripple has the advantage to this case, but it'll probably become like the Ripple standard as to determine whether a crypto is a security or a commodity.
I'm going to change gears a little bit for this last part and talking about blockchain technology, blockchain infrastructure, future financial system. This is a little bit off the wall, but one of the things that you and I talked about is the metaverse. And we recently seen what has happened to Facebook. They lost almost a trillion in values. I think close to maybe 800 million. Mark Zuckerberg's net worth, I think, has dropped from about 88 billion down to 37 billion. I think you can maybe still figure a way to live on 37, but he made a big bet on the metaverse. And my impression of the metaverse is that it's this digital environment where you can now transact business. And talk a little bit about that, because I'm still a little bit unclear about this whole metaverse, Web3. And you seem to have some knowledge about that. And I think that could be something that we need to keep an eye on for the future.
Yeah, I'm certainly bullish on the metaverse because I am also a gamer as well. And that's where I feel gaming is inevitably going to end up. So if we think about something like World of Warcraft, and World of Warcraft, people play, these games, and then they go on these quests together. But in these games, you have a lot of gear. You have a lot of like weapons, anything that you need in order to play the game. You can imagine one day that once everything's built on blockchain, you'll have people in these games, in these metaverses, literally developing things that can then be bought and sold on the blockchain, right? So just like what I was alluding to earlier with Disney creating their own NFTs, anyone will be able to create NFTs. And let's say you're a graphical designer. you'll be able to design, let's say, your own armor or your own skins for these games, and then you'll be able to basically open up your own little shop in the metaverse and sell these goods to other players. So this opens up an entire new world economy. It's kind of like that movie Ready Player One. Yeah, that movie is probably where we're headed in the next decades to come, where you will have these game companies that are going to have the same, they're going to have the same net worth as GDPs of small countries, because they'll basically have taxation rates through the 10% NFT sales, going back to like Blizzard or whatever, where they'll be able to get money through the entire ecosystem of the games that they create. So that's why I'm also pretty bullish on the metaverse.
So there's a saying, life imitating art or something like that. So this movie might be a glimpse to the future, because I don't know how many times we've watched a movie about so-called future, and then next thing we know, things that we thought was far off or just imaginary eventually became reality. So what was that name of the movie again? I might check it out.
Yeah, Ready Player One.
Ready Player One. Okay, not a plug for the movie, but certainly if you want to see what the future might look like, you can go and check that out. Now, the metaverse, again, it's something that I at first had a hard time grasping. And until I was talking to someone, I forgot who it was, I'm not sure if it was Andrew, that said, Zoom is basically like a metaverse, right? Because it's a digital environment. People get together. In some cases, they're doing business on Zoom, right? And they are maybe doing a sales pitch, or maybe it might be a some kind of meeting or another. And of course, you can do it for casually as well. But yeah, that would be a good example of the metaverse, would you say?
Yes, and also another example of why digital assets will continue to grow in value. Because like myself, I'm probably spending about 4 to 6 hours a day just looking at my screen, my computer screen or phone. Well, that is already in a way metaverse-like. Right. So imagine once we start getting more and more immersed with the digital realm, then those assets that you can buy will become more and more valuable, because wherever you spend your time is where you're spending your money.
So one last thing about the metaverse. When I first heard about it, my thought, if you guys are old enough like me to remember Sim City, as I am, which is basically you create your own city, your own buildings and whatever. That's kind of what I vision the metaverse as. And there's a company called Sandbox, which you can literally just buy a piece of so-called land or parcel and develop it and use it for whatever business purposes that you can come up with. One of the ways that I look at that, and going back to due diligence, see whether or not this is a valid business model, if this is something that's real or if this is something that's fake, are the other companies, especially large companies, especially large well-known names and all that, that are also now playing in that space. Can you tell us about some of the companies that you're aware of that are investing in the metaverse and looking to do more business in that type of environment?
Yes, there's a huge list of companies. I can't name all of them off the top of my head, but some of the ones that come to mind are like Adidas, right? So eventually where I see fashion and commerce on metaverses is they'll probably be able to scan your body, have an idea of what your sizing is, and you'll be able to like try on clothes virtually through the metaverse. So Adidas is part of it. I believe Nike is also part of it. You also have certainly all of the crypto companies are involved with Sandbox. You also have a lot of artists like Snoop Dogg and Steve Aoki are all part of it. They're all doing concerts on the metaverse, which has already been done through Fortnite as well, right, with Travis Scott. So yeah, you're going to see a melding of cultural and e-commerce and creating into your own world that you want to create through the metaverse.
And I think one of the reasons why they're doing that is because those celebrities, and even for us as individuals with our privacy and information and all that, wants to have more control over all of that, as opposed to leaving it up to, like in the past, the music companies or the movie studios, and where you kind of give up all of those rights. And now they're trying to bring that back, and so that they have more control. Is that what you see happening in that space?
Well, blockchain by nature decentralizes power away from third parties, right? So if we use our example that we were talking about earlier for NFTs, if, or let's say you're an artist, or let's say baseball cards, basketball cards, because I'm also in that realm. If you're a manufacturer like Topps and they created, let's say, a Mickey Mantle baseball card, those things are worth hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And a lot of times when they're being resold at third-party auction houses like Sotheby's or Christie's. Well, every time they're resold for those large amounts of money, unfortunately, Topps is not getting a cent of that, right? So that's why eventually, everything's going to become like an NFT, because they will stand to profit from their work in perpetuity because there's a contract built into the actual digital asset.
I'm just going to make one last comment before I turn this over to Q&A, because I'm sure there's some people in the audience that might like to ask some questions. But going back to my original comment about different asset classes, I think that some people are wary of stocks, bonds, whether some of those might be overvalued. We've seen, especially the past couple of years, because of the stimulus plans that the government passed, that collectibles like art, antique cars and all that, increased hugely in value. And so now I think in real estate, of course, is another good example of a asset class that has greatly increased. I think that digital assets might have been created at a good time because there are a lot of investors, a lot of money on the sideline looking for a place to put some of this money. And maybe now they're going to consider digital assets as one of those asset classes that they feel would be a good place to make an investment.
Right, especially as regulations come into focus and become more clear, then you're going to see even more large investors getting into the space. But you already have tons of billionaires and tons of massive companies already heavily invested into the space. It's just most people don't understand it yet and are not quite into it.
I've asked a lot of questions, and I'm sure there are some people maybe in our audience that have some questions. I see a few hands raised. So I am going to hand this microphone over to you, and I'm going to take yours, since this is wireless, and go around and ask some questions. So feel free to sit, or unless you want to stand, that's fine as well. I'm going to start over here. Okay.
Okay, you talked about the metaverse and such, and about blockchain, but the two concepts are different. And so when you mentioned about people having these artificial worlds and such and trading, the thing is we already have a working example, which is Second Life, where there's no blockchain and there are no scandals. There are economic transactions happening there for the last 15 years.
Yeah, the difference with Second Life, I'm not too familiar with it, but I believe they have their own in-game currency, or do they just use the current dollar?
Both, I believe.
Okay. The reason why being built on blockchain is important is because blockchain gives you clarity and is the only reliable method of saying that this item is a legitimate, unique item. All right, so let's use another example that I'm a little more familiar with, Diablo. So one of my roommates used to play in high school hours of Diablo, and he would sell his items for thousands of dollars on eBay, okay? But the problem with that is sometimes the transaction didn't go through because the item was faked or hacked. The nice thing about building it on blockchain is that you can't fraudulently create any kind of item. And it gives you that verification that the item is legit. That's why everything will come onto blockchain, and Second Life eventually I would guess, if they want to survive, also do the same.
Okay, next question.
Hey, Andrew. I'm wondering if you know currently of a marketplace for artworks on the blockchain where you're getting that 10% or amazingly 20% on retail. Does it exist now? And which one do you recommend?
Yes, there are quite a few of them. The most famous one is probably OpenSea. There's also Rarible. And it is not the marketplace that sets the transaction or the fee that you'd be getting for resale. That is set by the creator. So that's why for you as an artist, if you're interested in getting into this market, it could be very lucrative for you. But of course, if you're setting a fee that's too high, it dissuades people from potentially getting into your art because they're paying too much for fees.
Back here.
Hey, Andrew, this is really great, thanks. It's been a while since I've really looked at blockchain and that world. And, you know, I know a lot of folks have dabbled in it, they've looked at it, they probably haven't done near the research you've done in your career on it. I'm curious, like taking a look at it today, where would the average person want to look at starting if they wanted to engage in this market?
So there aren't a lot of good books in this space, and even if there are books in general, once they come out, they're about 2 to 3 years behind, which is massive in the blockchain space. But one book that I do think is pretty good as a basic is John Hargrove's book, Blockchain for Everyone. Even when I started jumping into the space myself, it literally took me about 6 months just to weed out the right influencers and YouTubers to get your information from. Most of the influencers and people on the internet talking about blockchain, just like crypto itself, 99% of them are scams and frauds. So the only ones I trust are the ones who can actually provide documents and proof that what they're saying may be valid, right? So it is very difficult to get into this space because just the mere concept of how blockchain works is something that I could talk with you guys about for a couple hours. But I would recommend that book first, and then if you wanted to talk with me afterwards about maybe some sources that I get my information, I'll be glad to share it with you.
Question up front.
Yeah, hi, my name is Louis. My Instagram handle is Los Angeles Mayor, and I'm a film teacher, and who's always been fond of Plato, Tales Republic. The conclusion of that book, he says if there were immutable ledgers, a tool for transparency. And as a film teacher, what actually happens when we live in a simulation. I feel like the screens are the data stream. And as someone who believes that a powerful story can really engage an audience in a cohesive manner, I've undertaken with my handle Los Angeles Mayor as a spiritual mayor of Los Angeles to create a metaverse called Optimistic. And I'm starting off by telling a story. Is there, for a guy like me who is just a teacher, a public school teacher, used to write ads for Nike, and I've had companies, is there someone that I could talk to about the concepts that I have, the ideas, to present those ideas?
What is your goal in the metaverse?
Well, I will say that I believe that meta needs to think about what you're thinking. Like if you believe in a simulation, we have the cooperation and engage to create the tools for the people to succeed. And a metaverse is like a teacher, and they make sure everybody wins. So as a film teacher in the metaverse should be to facilitate communities of success through learning.
Thanks. It sounds interesting. I think like this audience, if you want to stay after and bring up your thoughts, I think that would be great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being with us today.
Thank you
It
for
was a
having me.
great session. We are going to take a photo of you in just a second. And for those of you who joined us today, we will be back next month. We're going to be talking with Praneet, also from Roston Capital, about SPAC, IPO, and the stock market and where we're headed. So thank you, John, for an amazing facilitation this morning, and Andrew for being with us. With that, we're going to get a photo, and then you can stay and mingle.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.